Thank you, Nick Friedel, for your brilliant analysis that the Sixers played poorly. I don't understand what is this guy's deal? He sucks off Miami and shits on the Sixers and Harden, and that's all he ever does. Anyway, we are live.
Right.
What's that?
No.
Well, he's on every. Nick Friedel is on every beat that is he's on the Heat beat now. That the joke on Zach Lowe's podcast, as people start to come in here a little bit, the joke is that he ruins every beat that he's on. But his whole thing is just like hating on dudes. Like he hates on Zach LaVine all the time. He hates on James Harden. He hates on pretty much everyone except for the Warriors and the Heat and the front offices and the teams that require that you have access to journalism for some reason. But anyway,
I was on the Nets beat all year, and he's on that. And
yeah.
Nets fans would get frustrated with him because he would ask the most questions about Kyrie and Kyrie's vaccine, and how people felt about him, like the hypotheticals, what might have been had he been around all season. So Nets fans would say, like, they already answered this stuff.
Right, exactly. No, I definitely understand that guy. That guy frustrates me because of his just general existence. But I'm gonna tweet here for people to come in. We are live and sad.
Live and sad. I'm sad and mad too. I'm mad that TNT was pushing their agenda, that Embiid was moping through the whole game and not hurt.
Oh my God. Yeah. You think he's playing with a broken body. Like he's the SpongeBob. You ever see the SpongeBob meme of the dude like all wrapped up in metal? Like, that's what he is right now.
Yeah, it's tough to see. And Barkley, like, you kind of expect that from the TNT crowd, but then Chris Haynes gets on there and just, without any source material, just says, like, he was off by himself. Like, come on. Do you cover them all year? Does he know he never doesn't do that? So
yeah. I mean, look, there are going to be narratives that are pushed. It's just like the whole Heat culture thing. And like, this is one of the reasons why I'm really upset that the Sixers are losing to Miami, is because there are these core values. What's that?
B-ball just bricked a dunk.
B-ball Paul? Yeah. I mean, well, he was one of the only ones that played with fucking heart. But my whole thing is like these narratives that are made up by the media and ate up by fans. And Miami's one of those teams that they clearly, like, you kind of have to kiss their ass in order to cover the team. Like, there's Toronto, Miami, Golden State, the Lakers. Like, there's like 4 or 5 teams where, like, if you're not constantly kissing the asses of the teams, you're not going to get any access to the teams. In the media,
there's a few people who would add the Knicks to that list too.
Yeah, I mean, the Knicks speak, but although, the Dolan criticisms have definitely been out there, but that's more national media than local media. But fans eat that stuff up because it's pushed by the media. And, look, they have to get access to do their jobs. I understand that. But it's also like, at a certain point, like, Miami is Miami. Yes, they have done a good job finding undrafted talent. They've done all that. But ultimately, none of it matters unless they get Jimmy Butler in free agency.
Yeah.
And that's a luxury that other teams aren't afforded.
Getting
and that's
the third
something
pick for Wade, and then everyone else wants to join.
Like, my whole thing is these narratives that are pushed by the media, these fantasies that are created about culture and about all this shit. It's just like, they're in fucking Miami, Florida, dude. Like, they have the beach. They have the glamour. People want to live there. They have good taxes.
Yeah.
It's easier to build when you can get Jimmy Butler to sign there in free agency. It's a luxury that 90% of NBA teams do not have. And I think that it's something that...
Massive advantage, yeah.
Massive. I mean, like I said on the episode previously, like, we traded for Jimmy Butler and we couldn't get him to stay. Like... There are teams that can do all the culture building they want. The Memphis Grizzlies are a great example. I think the Memphis Grizzlies are an awesome young upstart team. They have to build through the draft. They're never going to get free agents. they can do all the culture stuff they want. If they don't hit on Ja Morant, they're fucked. So I just hate that this idea that the Miami Heat are like a mom and pop business is just insane to me. It's a weird narrative, and it's gonna and what this series is, and even though Joel Embiid missed the first 2 games, even though the Sixers, when healthy, could potentially be the better team in this series, the narratives that are going to come out of this are that the Heat wanted it more, and the Heat are hardworking, and the Heat are what it's like. It's just bullshit to me. But anyway, there are people in here.
I think
so we can get rolling.
Now we're gonna do less ranting.
We can do. I probably should stop. Miami kicked their ass tonight. The Sixers came out. They had no fucking heart. I wish we recorded after the last episode when James Harden was fucking Steph Curry down the stretch of the game and couldn't miss. And that would have been a lot more fun to record after that. But recording after this, not quite as fun. But so yeah, what happened tonight, Dave?
I mean, I feel like this is one of those games where if Embiid came into this, let's say magically, never hurt his thumb, never hurt his face, I think they would have stole one of the first 2 games. And I think they could have won both at home for sure. And I think this is the kind of game you might have lost no matter what. At some point they were going to play well. Joel did not look good. I don't know if he tweaked his back diving. What a poor decision to dive for that ball in case he did tweak his back there. Like, you've got all these ailments. I know you want to, but there's not even an on-court advantage to that play, really. They got a 3-pointer out of it. Poor judgment there. And then he was never the same. So I don't know what to make of his game. Was it the sum of all of these cumulative injuries? I know you made the SpongeBob meme joke. Like, he's just not right. And when he's not right, the Sixers are not the same team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can nitpick all of the decisions, the Doc Rivers rotations, the fact that, as someone pointed out, Miles Johnson here in the comments, how can this team come out in game 5 versus the Raps and today and look like this? And that is the confounding thing about this team, is that, like, at times they look absolutely miserable. They can't get anything going on offense because whether it's they're denying Joel the ball in the post, or Harden can't beat anyone off the dribble, or tonight, for example, it was kind of a combination of all the things in one. No one could hit a shot. Tobias and Maxey were incredibly inefficient when they were getting open looks. The Heat are okay with those two kind of attacking their defense and letting the chips fall where they may. When that happens, they're focused on slowing down Harden and Embiid, the 2 engines of the offense. And it proved to be an effective strategy tonight when the Sixers couldn't hit any fucking shots. Really frustrating, just the fact, like, I can get mad at Doc, but ultimately, why do you need the coach to hype you up for a game 5 when it's 2-2? You just won 2 games in a row, emotional wins at home. You're going on the road and you come out completely flat, to the point where it was like 5 minutes into the game, it felt like the game was over. Like, it wasn't even like they had they didn't really have they were down 12 at half, but it felt like 25. It felt like they had zero energy. And once again, kind of what you said is, like, Joel obviously playing hurt, but at the same time, like, if Joel's going to play like he did in the first half, the Sixers are not going to beat any team in the playoffs, let alone the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, when Jimmy Butler's playing the way that he is right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, covering the Nets this season. I heard Steve Nash make a lot of comments like, I was a player in this league. How much motivation can I really impart? They got to be self-motivated. I don't have a pep talk for them. And I thought that was interesting because he said it throughout the season. And then come crunch time, when they're losing these huge games, game 1 or maybe it was game 1 to the Celtics in the playoffs, and then game 3 when it felt like it was all over, both Goran Dragic and then later Blake Griffin called out the team in a way that you felt like maybe he meant the coach. He was like, I didn't feel like our spirit or energy was there. And I always wrestle with that. Is that something you can put on the coach? And I tend to agree with you. Like, I have a million reasons to be frustrated with Doc. I don't necessarily put that on him that they came out so flat. I don't know what he could have done to light a fire in their butt. I know he had some of those famous stories. Didn't he like leave some cash in the Lakers ceiling of their visitors' locker room? And he was like, "We're coming back for this, Celtics. We're coming back for this money." Did you ever hear that one?
No. Oh my God.
I think he hid cash in the ceiling of Staples, maybe. Anyway.
It's a great bit. What if they lost the next game and then Doc had to like call them like, could you FedEx that cash?
What if he had someone run back before they got on the bus and just grab it?
He's like, yeah, by the way, checking the ceiling. I put a bunch of money in there. They're like, are you a drug dealer, Doc? What's going on here? What are you cooking up?
It just sometimes feels like the cadence of these playoff series where if you win an emotional game, you might just get smoked the next one, even if these are two good teams. Like, I kind of feel like that might happen to the Bucks in the next game. Like, the Bucks lost a really tough one. They might just get cooked in the next game in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, I think that going back to the last game for the Sixers, although they won that game, it wasn't like the first game when Embiid came back. You had the emotional factor of that. You had the on-the-court factor of that, Miami having to basically design their entire game plan around slowing him down, which got the shooters going, and the defense was completely different because you didn't have the corpse of DeAndre Jordan protecting the rim. You had Joel Embiid. And then in the second game at home, it more just kind of came down to the defensive process from the Heat was fine. I had a few people reach out to me like, what do you think Miami does differently in this game? And I was like, I don't really think they do anything differently. Like, I think maybe Duncan Robinson plays because they need more shooting, and he did play this game. But I was like, I wouldn't change a thing if I were Miami. I would just do exactly what I did because I'm going to roll the dice and chance on the fact that James Harden isn't going to make every single step back three that he made in the end of that game in the fourth quarter. And I'm going to kind of just go with the same game plan I went with. And that's exactly what they did. And they came out and their shooter shot better at home. It's weird because it's like, I've never seen a series. Miami shot poorly in game one, and then they shot pretty good in game two. And then the Sixers shot amazingly in game 3 and 4. And then game 5, Miami back at home shoots great again. And the Sixers can't. I've never seen such a disparity. Like, Niang and Green are the team's two high volume shooters who both have their own flaws. Like, I don't even think Niang should be in the rotation because of his defensive struggles. Like, I think his defense is horrible. In transition, he's a fucking mess. He's just simply too slow, and he's laterally too slow. They can go at him every possession in transition. In the half court, he's just not quick enough to really keep up with their guys. They're going to get a lot of open looks because Sixers are going to be helping because he's getting blown by, all that kind of shit. And I feel as though with Niang, and a guy like Niang, I talked about it before the series, I talked about it during the series, if he's not hitting 50% of his threes, he's completely unplayable. And tonight, just kind of compounding on top of the fact that Harden and Embiid, someone said they only got 6 free throws this entire game, plus the fact that Danny and Niang just can't shoot on the road. Like, the roster construction is a massive issue because in most games, even like, when your top players struggle, like for example, last night, the Celtics, their top guys struggled. Jaylen Brown was invisible for a chunk of the game. Jason Tatum was miserable for 2.5 quarters, and it was an ugly game, and the Bucks couldn't pull away, and all that stuff you said about like, yeah, maybe the Bucks kind of lost the series there because they let Boston get back into it. It feels as though like we like Maxey or Tobias or the shooters or whatever, like in the games where they're struggling, they're disasters. And because of the fact that the roster has so many one-way players, you have Maxey, who has his struggles on defense because of his size. You have Niang, who struggles on defense because of his quickness, his speed, whatever. Thybulle, who is not an NBA player offensively. He's the worst player in the NBA offensively. And it's not an exaggeration. He does literally nothing. He literally just catches the ball and throws it to other people. Like, he's afraid to touch a basketball. And then you have inconsistent shooters with Niang and and Green that you basically have a roster that you created on the fly that's filled with one-way players, and in some cases, when Thybulle's having a bad defensive night, a zero-way player. You have your best two-way bench player is Paul Reed, and he wouldn't crack a rotation on another team like right now. Like, he wouldn't be in the Celtics rotation, and he wouldn't be in the Heat's rotation. He wouldn't be in any of these playoff rotations. And because of that, you really have no margin for error with the starters and the stars. So if Embiid and Harden are bad in a game, that's it. That's kind of like this roster is so top heavy that you're cooked if those two aren't playing at the level like Harden played last game, or even Embiid played defensively like he did 2 games ago and was such a major distraction offensively for the Heat to kind of have to game plan around that. Like, it just feels as though unless those two are going to carry us, then this team can't really advance any further than they've got.
Yeah, when these, like you said, I mean, I think you nailed it. When these guys struggle, it gets bad fast. Like, they're not getting lots of deflections. They're not necessarily providing a ton of spacing. There's a lot of these possessions where I see Jimmy Butler on an island with his defender, and even if a Sixer wanted to help, he couldn't get there in time. And on the other end of the court, you almost never see that. You see Jimmy darting around and shadowing and lunging for steals, and he seems to find a way to get back to the closest shooter when the kick out happens. And the Sixers don't have the same, ability defensively to rotate and close out and do that type of help defense. It's a little bit different. The Sixers have a lot of these like ISO guys who like to get a bucket. And when it doesn't go well, it goes very poorly. I was listening to a podcast Jake Fisher had on Gina Mizell, the Inquirer, and she was talking about how, I guess, Morey ultimately made the decision to retain Matisse in that trade, and that cost him Andre Drummond, I think she implied. And she sort of questioned that. Like, it would have been nice to have Drummond as the backup when, as you see, the backup center position is such a point of contention and Matisse isn't playing well. Maybe she might have mentioned, as anyone should, that things were better before the whole vaccination status in Toronto thing for him. But yeah, there's definitely some flaws, and
I mean, that's a major missed opportunity first off, Daryl Morey. He's a great GM. He's done a lot of really good things. It's not here to slander him. Not selling high on Matisse Thybulle has got to be one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. I've been yelling about how much this guy sucks for like 6 months. He's one of the worst offensive players I've ever seen in my entire life. And if you're this genius GM, how can you not see that this guy is never going to be able to play in the playoffs? And if he can't play in the playoffs, you're not going to want to extend him. He has his rookie extension coming up soon. Are you going to pay this guy $10 million a year to not be playable in the playoffs? And now, between the vaccine thing and this playoffs, his value is never going to be lower than it is going into that extension in terms of a trade.
I think you and Derek Bodner, when you had him on your pod, foreshadowed this a little bit, talking about, like, is he going to be playoff viable?
I mean, no, we know he's not. He's never played well in the playoffs. Like, he didn't last year, he didn't the year before, and some of the stuff was a little bit like, all right, well, you're in the bubble, you're a rookie, whatever. Last year, okay, maybe it was the weirdness of the Ben Simmons situation, plus he was thrust into a bigger role with Danny Green getting injured and him having to play more minutes and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, it's pretty obvious to me if the guy doesn't have a single offensive skill, he's never going to be playable in the playoffs, which I got a ton of shit from people when I kept saying it around the time. I was like, you have to, and by the way, it didn't, I don't even know if it came down to Drummond or Thybulle or whatever, because honestly, like, Drummond wouldn't have made a difference in this series, really. I don't think Paul Reed is playing poorly. I think he's been totally fine.
Well, if you watch that Nets Celtics series, Drummond wasn't really playable in that series either. So
exactly. Yeah. There are going to be certain series where Drummond's not playable. And like, it would be like, that's why I'm not really sweating losing Drummond, because he's a free agent, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But my whole thing about like selling high on Thybulle is like creating a roster around Joel Embiid and James Harden and Tyrese Maxey that makes more sense. And I just don't see a role for a guy like Thybulle on any contending team. And I felt as though at the deadline, and it did not come down to this, the Nets said, you have to give us Seth Curry or else we're not doing the deal. Like, this was not Seth Curry or Matisse Thybulle. Like, that was not the decision that was made. But my whole thing that I was getting pushback on from people was, well, Seth's going to get targeted defensively. And I'm like, yeah, he might get targeted defensively in some matchups, but I feel as though people really harp on the defensive thing when it comes to the playoffs. They never harp on the offensive thing, ever. I talked about it on Twitter. I talked about it to people that listen to the podcast. I feel like having a strong defense, and part of the reason why Duncan Robinson can't play in this series, according to Eric Spoelstra, is because of his defense. And I don't really understand that. I know he didn't shoot great tonight, but like, he's kind of the inverse of Thybulle, where if his shots aren't going down, then he's not playable. But like, he's the kind of guy that can get hot off the bench and shoot 8 for 9 like he did in one game in the Hawks series. My whole point of this is that, like, you can have maybe one weaker defender on the court, like the Heat have had Tyler Hero on the court, and kind of cover up some of those weaknesses. But when you start to get into the offensive end, no one ever talks about guys who just have zero offensive viability and fuck up the spacing on offense and fuck up all that stuff. But my whole point about this whole thing is that, like,
in Philly they have, but yeah.
Well, my whole thing is like, well, yeah, right, exactly. My whole thing is that the roster construction, it was made on the fly, and I understand. I think that, honestly, kind of going back to the trade deadline thing, is like, Sean Marks was smart to bring it up to the buzzer, because it made it so that Daryl Morey couldn't make other moves. Like, he couldn't go get Dennis Schroeder for whatever. Like, not that Dennis Schroeder would make a difference in the series. My point is that, like, there were other moves the Sixers were eyeing that they might have been able to get, like a Torrey Craig or a Dennis Schroeder, or just someone that's like a rotation level player you could bring off the bench and have them play minutes. And they just weren't able to do that because the Harden thing was so important. And Marks knew that and brought it way up there to kind of fuck with the Sixers, basically.
Well, I wonder if they both sort of agreed upon that, and that's why you got the, Woj reporting that, like, they haven't even spoken yet. I always sensed maybe they were both okay with bringing it to that deadline.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that was part of the thought process, because of the Sixers were looking at it like, if we give you 2 first-round picks, you can then turn around and go trade that for, like, Jeremy Grant or something. Right. You can trade that for, like, a player that would help you this year.
Nets fans were upset about that and got pushback from their lead beat reporter for The Athletic, saying, like, maybe Joe Harris and those 2 picks was something to do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. But ultimately, like, the Sixers situation is a little bit more dire than the Nets, I would say. Just because you don't know how long Harden is going to be Harden, even this version of Harden, which is, as I've joked around and called him, Ficky Rubio. Like, he's basically an amped up, floor general, the Peyton Manning quarterback, late career Peyton Manning, as you joked last time you were on the podcast. Yeah. Like, it ultimately comes down to, like, the Sixers in theory should have made more of a push for this season, but they still have 2 more games to kind of turn things around. My thing is like, game 7 is in Miami. So, like, even if they come home and they win game 6, which they totally could on Thursday, the shooters always shoot better at home. The Sixers might come out with energy. We've seen them, after looking like total shit, not this bad as they did tonight, but we've seen them come out after a really bad game, like game 5 at home, and then just beat the shit out of the Raptors in game 6. Like, it's possible it could happen. It's possible.
Let me ask you this real quick. What are the odds? What's the % chance that we learn Joel can't play in the next game?
I mean, it depends.
Are they going to X-ray that orbital based on what happened today? I mean,
maybe
it looked like the medical guy who went over to him wasn't done, didn't it? Like, he was putting a glove on, and then Joel just put the mask on and went back in the game. And I wonder if he was in that much pain. Did he feel something was off? I don't know. I'm not saying it's likely, but I would say definitely non-zero.
Yeah, I mean, Dwayne Dedmon hit the ball, which hit Embiid in the face and then caused Embiid to, I mean, it looked really bad. It looked very painful.
I feel as though like he realized something. It wasn't simply the pain; it was like the fear of knowing something's wrong in there. That's my eye, man.
Yep. Yeah, there was that. But the weird thing was like Embiid didn't even come out of the game. He went right back in, and then the game was over by the third quarter. Like we were out of it. But Embiid, his best quarter was the third quarter. Like he looked like he was finally getting shots to fall. He was figuring out how to get around the defense and get to the rim. Like he was drawing fouls. Like defensively, he didn't look great this game, but offensively, it felt like he was figuring out some things, and it is strange. Like unless the doctors and the trainers say you can't play, he's playing.
No, for sure. If he gets the green light, he's going to play. But I wonder at some point, if you were those doctors, are things not as cut and dry as they feel to the fans? Are you like, we are giving him a green light that maybe we don't feel 100% about? Because we know that if he takes the wrong hit, double vision is a risk, the sinking, all the weird things that we had to learn about in 2018, a sinking eye in the socket. Those things are all possibilities, and they could all need a plate put in there like the last one did. If he takes a hit on that thumb, it could complicate a surgery that would right now be simple. We're hearing no surgery on the face. We're hearing yes surgery on the hand. But if he took the wrong type of hit on the thumb, now he could need a graft, a piece of something, cartilage from another part of his body or whatever it is. I read about it, but I'm not a doctor. So yeah, you start to think like, all right, now he's playing with the thumb. Now he's playing with the face. Maybe the concussion symptoms are still there. Maybe he tweaked his back, diving into the stands.
Yeah.
And this all-in calculus makes us a little reluctant to just say, go for it. But probably they will. Probably he'll be out there. I don't know what percent he will look. He doesn't look to me like he's even 65% of what he was games 1 and 2 versus the Raptors. Why do you think, let me ask you this, how come they have so much trouble now getting him the ball when he's fronted? Is that something about the way he can't catch it or pin a guy on his hip?
I mean, I don't know, man. I feel as though one of the things that's really frustrated me, and even though they won the last game, was this is the Miami's selling out to stop Embiid from getting the ball in the post. Whether there's something going on with him with vision or with the ability to catch the ball with the thumb, or if it's just the Sixers don't feel comfortable making those passes. One of the things that has been really frustrating me about that is when that isn't there, they kind of just dance around the perimeter, don't really know what to do. There's no alternative. There's no backup.
The alternative is Toby ISOs, just like it was in the non-Embiid minutes last year.
Or hardened step backs. And when those aren't falling, the offense is going to look terrible.
They're not doing a ton of just straight up Joe Harden pick and rolls either. I don't know if that's because they're worried he can't catch the pocket passes as well, or can't see them with that mask on, maybe peripheral.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, I know that Miami has made it a point to kind of stop those actions, like clog up the paint, and they're willing to live with having to rotate back onto shooters and all of that. But especially when they're running the zone, it makes it a lot harder to, run a pick and roll. You can't really run a pick and roll with a zone defense. But I do feel as though, it's hard not to focus on all the things that went bad. Just kind of going back to what you were saying about Joel, like I personally am like, look, Joel's going to play if he's given the opportunity. I personally don't think it's worth his health. I personally, if it were me or if it were up to me, I would not tell him to risk his health. He's not going to listen to me. I don't know, whatever. But my whole thing is like, look, like
try it. Maybe will.
I mean, I would love to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. I would love for Joel to play and be fine and all that stuff. But if there is major risk to that, and we saw it pop up tonight, that like this team, as high as their ceiling can look at times, and I think I even said on the last episode, this is the first time I feel like this team can actually win a title if some things break in their direction, which includes poor injury luck for other teams and includes outlier shooting that we saw in other games.
Yeah, both. But yeah,
both of those things. We kind of need both of them to make a run.
But whoever wins it is going to have had both of those things. So someone's going to.
Absolutely. Yeah, but my whole point on this is that like you're not going to get that with compromised Joel Embiid.
Right.
You have to have Joel Embiid be Joel Embiid, or else you're not going to get that. Like it's just like you have to have Harden look similarly to how he looked in the last 2 games. You have to have Joel Embiid play at his level, and you need to be able to knock down your shots and get some injury luck. That would be the formula for the Sixers to make a run to win the title. If they're saying to Joel, like, we're worried about your health, and you planted, like, he's not going to be 100%, which takes that option off the table. So I personally don't think that, like, risking your health is ever worth it. And especially when you consider the fact that I don't think that this team can win a title unless a lot of things break in their direction. And one of those things is just being on the good side of injury luck and not the side that Joel's on right now.
Yeah, man. It's tough to be a Sixers fan. Last year, it was May 31st, and he tore his meniscus, and we were like, well, you know, everyone was sort of zappering, like, well, maybe he already had the tear, and so it's not going to be a big deal.
You got to have a medical degree in order to be a Sixers fan, apparently. And also just kind of like, I do feel really bad for Embiid. Like you said, like the narrative that TNT was pushing that like the MVP thing got into his head. Like, dude, come on. The guy's fighting through all these physical ailments. I don't think that Jokic winning his second MVP is what threw Embiid off. Like, I do think that it sucks. Like, one of the major reasons why I wished he did win MVP, other than the fact that I think he deserves it, is because I don't want him to try to kill himself to win this regular season award
anymore. And
get into the situations that he's getting himself into health-wise. Like, I just feel like the guy's going to kill himself trying to play 70 to 80 games a year, and he's going to end up hurting himself. And in the long run, that's going to be what's worse for him and his career.
If Ramona Shelburne came out tomorrow and had said, when Joel Embiid found out he didn't win the MVP, he was very disappointed, I'd be totally fine.
Of course.
But when you're watching a game to hear he looks mopey, he looks sullen, he looks like he's got his head up his ass, you know, at least Barkley, to his credit, said, that's my opinion. I felt like we stepped it up a notch when, was it Chris Haynes who got on there next and said, like, he was alone by himself, he wasn't around his teammates, and I don't know if it was because of the MVP news, and all of a sudden it sounds like you're reporting it's because of the MVP news.
Right.
And Spiro Dedos gets on there, and he's like, you know, you just have to imagine the psychological impact of not winning that MVP. And suddenly it's this full.
Is that the play-by-play guy?
Yeah.
Spiro.
By
the way, this is the worst broadcasting crew I've ever heard in my entire life.
You weren't happy about what? Go ahead.
Grant Hill is brain dead. This guy literally is like, we do drunk streams where I take tequila shots during the game, and I think I could call a better game than Grant Hill. This guy is a bozo, dude. Like, literally in the first 2 games talking about how great DeAndre Jordan was, I was like, this is the worst player that's played in the entire playoffs. What game are you watching? Like,
oh, man. DeAndre discourse. Maybe he saw the B-ball breakdown defense video. The coach, the YouTube coach is talking about why DeAndre, actually, the Heat having 157 offensive rating when DeAndre Jordan is on the court is a good thing. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why these BS narratives get overblown. And it's tough. I just, you know, like, if you want to say that he was disappointed, leave it at that. But don't say that's why he's having a poor game while he's playing through literally a broken face. You saw him tweak his back. You saw him, you know, stay down. That's probably why he wasn't playing well.
And look, like, all that stuff is true. But the sad thing about this is that the history of this will not ever remember that part.
No,
it won't. And that's kind of what I talked about before. This is like, this playoffs was going to be a legacy defining playoffs for Joel Embiid and James Harden. And if they go out sad in one of the next 2 games, all people are going to remember is that. because people want to root against them because they're the foul grifters. People want to root against them because Harden forced his way out of Brooklyn and Houston, and because Joel is representative of Sam Hinkie in the process, and that's all fair. Like, I think that's fine. People can hate on them. I think they should embrace it. And I think that it's unfortunate that people will look at this and judge Joel's ability, which, by the way, last year in the playoffs, played spectacularly defensively against the Hawks outside of the first game of the series, which honestly wasn't even all that much his fault in that game. Played spectacular defensively and was carrying offensively, averaging like 30 points a game in that series. And all people are going to remember that was the Sixers were, and he had a torn meniscus, but all people are going to remember is the Sixers choked away a series. And I think that it is really unfortunate because now we're starting to get into the years of Joel's career where it's like he's 28 years old. He's had all these injuries. We finally have a guy in Harden who's good enough to be the second guy, other than the Jimmy Butler year, which, was some weird shit. That this is really the first time, and it just feels like we've got to be more careful about how Joel carries himself in the regular season ultimately. Like, we got to start load managing him more. We have to, because if this is like, I know these aren't wear and tear injuries, by the way. I just want to say these are kind of freak accidents, generally speaking. But at the same time, when you're playing as intense as Joel is, when you're playing as often as Joel is, you're like, one of the reasons why I was frustrated they didn't close out the Raptors series earlier is because it left him vulnerable to the injury that happened in Game 6. Like, the more intense basketball you play, it's the more opportunity you're going to get hurt. And it feels as though, I just feel like I'm hoping that moving forward, whether they advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, whether they come back in the series or they lose, that the team prioritizes the load management and the stuff throughout the season and focuses more on, like, maybe the last 2 weeks of the season, you just let them fucking chill. And you let them get right. And, like, maybe you play them here and there just to keep them in shape somewhat. But, like, maybe your approach to this is similar to the Kawhi Leonard thing from the Raptors years, the Clippers years, where you're just kind of preserving Joel Embiid for what really matters most. And you can have Tyrese Maxey, and if Tobias Harris is on the team, or if they trade him, and James Harden, and they can kind of just, and Harden, who knows with the hamstring stuff, you might need to do some load management there as well, but just kind of keeping your eyes on the prize and not getting too bogged down by regular season, standings and awards and all that stuff.
Yeah, I've been on board with this since 2018, and I just feel like nobody wants to hear it, but it's still true. I don't think that they are going to go into next season with that plan. Joel has already made comments like, I think I'm better when I play all the time. I'm in better shape, which is complete nonsense from an injury standpoint. Like, yes, you might be in better shape if you're playing in all the games conditioning wise, but you're not going to be in better shape in terms of go win the championship, because there's going to be some bumps and bruises that you picked up, and the chances that you are not healthy by the time you get there are much higher. Like you saw with Kyrie Irving, he was playing, like, how many games did he play? 25. He was sensational in some of those games because it's just not the same load. If the season were 65 games, it would be a lot easier for stars to play 100% every night. And stars are very, very smart to not do that the way things are. So I'm with you.
I mean, Jimmy Butler did that this year. Like, we're looking look at the other side. Like, Bam Adebayo took a while to come back from his injury. Jimmy Butler, like, Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers, if Doc Rivers is still the coach of this team next year, which I don't know if he will. But moving forward past this season, because at this point,
odds on that?
I don't really, whatever. Okay. The Doc stuff, what the latest odds on him, getting the Lakers job?
Yeah, I can just give you the latest odds. They were changed today.
Oh, brilliant. Did Bel Air Country Club send the Lakers some new information? Or Vegas some new information?
I don't know. Was it like Ethan Strauss revealing that there was some stuff about Mark Jackson? And I don't know. Mike Brown's off the board, so maybe there's still hope.
Mark Jackson shouldn't have a job in the NBA, let alone a coaching job. So he's a psycho.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. Load manage formulaically, like every 3 or 4 games, no back-to-backs. I'd be totally fine with that. It worked for Kawhi, and I mentioned this last time I was on. I think Kevin Durant played literally half the games in his first full season back. All anyone remembers is he almost knocked out the champs without Harden and Kyrie helping. So it doesn't matter what your regular season was.
Also coming off the Achilles, like they were really smart about how they handled that situation. LeBron's had some ones, and like it sucks because all those guys have had their time to build their legacies. Yeah. You know what I mean? They had their runs, they won their titles, they won their MVPs, except for Kawhi. I think Kawhi only won Defensive Player of the Year, but he won Finals MVP twice. Like, it sucks that Joel just won't be afforded, because I just feel bad, because it's like he's not afforded the same luxuries that other star players have because of the injuries and because of everything that he has been through. And I just wish that it didn't happen this way, but ultimately it's going to come down to a choice between regular season achievements and postseason. And the goal for Daryl Morey should be to build a team similarly to kind of what Miami has done, which is like, I joke about the fact that like the narratives are driving me insane with Miami, but the benefit of having what Miami does and what other teams do when they build those teams with depth through picking up guys in the draft or undrafted, and they find free agents like the Martin twin that they got, and then Max Strus and all these guys, is that it allows your stars to have that rest and to get to the playoffs in one piece. And because of that, Jimmy Butler has looked like the best player in this series. And if
Game 5 against Atlanta, he didn't even play with knee inflammation, and now it looks like peak Jordan.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And maybe part of that is the fact that Jimmy had the load management. Maybe part of it is just he's in the right situation for himself and he's kind of figured it out. But just kind of wrapping this up, how do you feel about Thursday, Game 6 at home? Do you think they extend the series to 7, or do you think Joel is going to play?
Yes, I think he's going to play. I am prepared for that outside chance where I guess he gets an X-ray or whatever, and they realize he shouldn't, and they change their mind. But yeah, I think he'll play, and I think they'll win. Even if Joel is just like gutting it out and clearly not right, I think some of the other guys will step it up and they'll find a way with him as essentially the defensive anchor. Maybe the move is just simply not rely on him. Like, they were expending a lot of energy trying to get him the ball. You could see in that third or fourth quarter, I felt like the Heat bigs started realizing, like, this is like body shots. You're getting body shots in on this guy, and Game 5, Game 6, Game 7, that's going to be the late rounds of this fight. And like, you saw Bam playing very, very physically, not allowing him to get the ball. And then you saw Dedmon still lunging in, and it just felt like they were emboldened by the fact that he wasn't quite right. So I think they're going to come extremely physical in the next one. I do think the Sixers will win. And then I think they're going to need to get lucky to win Game 7, because I wouldn't pick them in that one.
Yeah. I'm not really sure what's going to happen with Joel. I hope that he just is healthy. Like, obviously he's not healthy right now, but like, I hope that he makes the best decision for himself long-term in terms of health, because I think that it needs to be said that Joel being 100% is the only way the Sixers will ever win a title. And right now it does not appear that he is. So I don't know how Game 6 is going to go. I certainly feel better about the fact that they're going home, but I do feel as though one of the things, and I love the fact that they traded for James Harden. I've defended the trade. I feel like it's a great thing. Last game proved why. He, can't carry a team anymore, but when Joel's playing, He can bail you out of situations with tough shot making in the playoffs, and his playmaking is amazing and all the shit that I've been talking about. But one of the things that I discussed before, not even before the Heat series, but before the Raptor series, was that it does feel as though, especially with Joel compromised the way that he is now, and Harden's history of struggling in big games in the playoffs, and Doc's history of coaching poorly in big games in the playoffs, that this team is designed to fold, like, in a big moment. So, like, it wouldn't shock me if it wouldn't shock me either way. It wouldn't shock me if they came out and they won by 20 in the next game, and it wouldn't shock me if they came out and they got the fucking shit kicked out of them and they lost by 20 at home. Like, that's the kind of thing with this team, is like, I don't really know what I'm going to get on any given night. It's just really strange. They have such a high ceiling, but also such a low floor, that it's like the simplest thing early in games, whether it's Joel not being able to get going, whether it's not getting foul calls, whether it's the other team hitting some big shots, or if it's hustle plays that they can't get offensive rebounds or whatever it is, the littlest thing seems to take this team out of games. And I just want to see them put up a fucking fight and win one of these games like they did in game 4, where it's coming down to the stretch, and they're hitting tough shots and they're doing everything that they need to do. Ultimately, they probably win the next game. I don't know. Who knows? I have no faith that they can win a game 7 in Miami. Like, I just think that to play the way that they have played in 2 or 3 of these games in the playoffs, when it's like, hey, your fucking season might be on the line if you lose this game, is crazy to me. Like, it's just crazy that they could look so shitty. But I'm ultimately just worried most about Joel and his health, and I feel as though giving Morey, and maybe Doc does take the Lakers job if they lose one of the next 2 games, and that's the only situation in which I think Doc Rivers is not going to be coaching this team next year, because the ownership is not going to be paying a bunch of money to get rid of Doc Rivers and buy out that contract. It's got to be Doc leaving for another job that he wants, and the Lakers job's the only job that he could potentially want, because he wants to go play golf in LA and hang out with LeBron. And I just think that the goal for the team this year and moving forward just has got to be, I'm sure not this year, but just moving forward, is just building a more sustainable team around Joel Embiid and making it so that you're
not designed to fail.
Yeah, not designed to collapse, not designed to fail.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, he's got a book title here, Designed to Fold, How Little Things Are Destined to Stack Up Against the Sixers and Topple Them Like the peons they are. Oh, man. Yeah, it's grim, but I agree with you. Like, if you're Daryl Morey, you're watching this team and you've seen, like, you know all the what ifs. You know that they weren't calling the landing zone violations in, like, 2018, and then it happened again in 2019. And you probably argue against things like momentum and how that's overrated, and, like, the Doc stuff. He's talked publicly about that being overrated. But in your heart of hearts, you know there's no algorithm. Do you also worry that maybe there is something to this, and you need to get a couple guys in there that you know are not designed to fold and who can help support your team through these moments? And maybe Danny Green is that guy. He seems streaky enough to not even notice if it's a big moment or not. He might hit 6 threes in a big moment. He might go 0 for 8, and it's really just about his jumper and not the moment.
No, it's true. Yeah.
But maybe they need a couple other guys like that.
They need more dogs, is what you're trying to say. They need guys who have that dog in them.
If you offered to trade, Eric Spoelstra for Doc Rivers and PG Tucker for Furkan Korkmaz, like, could the Sixers have swept this series even with a hobbled Joel? Maybe.
Look, all I'm saying is the Sixers win this series with Omar Yurtseven instead of DeAndre Jordan. But no, like, another thing before we wrap up here is, like, they didn't win one of the first 2 games because they didn't have Joel Embiid. You're not going to win a lot of series you go down 0-2. Like, to put it like this, the Sixers, if they lose the next game, if they win the next game and they force a game 7, they will be 3-2 in the Joel Embiid games and lose the series. Like, that's just the reality of going down 0-2.
That's the macro version of a plus minus where someone was a -9, but you won the Joe minutes.
And also, just kind of going back to that whole point is like, I know Daryl Morey doesn't want to spend money on a backup center. I know Daryl Morey says in his brain, well, if I'm paying this guy $8 million a year and he's only playing 10 minutes in the playoffs, then what the fuck am I doing? I understand that. But also, I brought this up on the last episode. I'd feel a lot better about the Sixers if they had played Daniel Tice in those first those first two games, or any center that would be, even if they played Charles Bassey or whatever. But you have Doc Rivers, so there's that roadblock as well. But like having
maybe you trade Danny Green in the 2025 for Horford, and then that's solved.
Let's bring back. I mean, he just scored 30 points. People doubted Elton Brand's vision, but all I saw was Tobias playing great before this game and Al Horford cooking, and people doubted the God. But no, my whole point here is that like I think that it is, whether it's draft capital like they did with Bassey and Reed, or it's just like getting an MLE backup center or a $5 million backup center or whatever it is, it's worth it to keep Joel healthy for the playoffs. It's worth it to invest in. I know that it seems insane, especially because this team's so thin and they have so few tradable salaries and all that stuff. And we'll get into that stuff later. But I just feel like the number one priority for the Sixers should be keeping Joel Embiid as healthy as possible, because this is now the third time in the playoffs where it has the Raptor series, where he was injured, or before the playoffs he was injured, and then he was injured in the playoffs, and he also had the stomach issues. And then last year with the torn meniscus, he's playing through it. And then this year, like, it just feels like he has the injuries, and he also has historically bad luck with the base shit.
Markelle Fultz dribble handoff luck.
Yeah, Pascal Siakam smacking, like it's really bad luck. But at the same time, as Emart said on the last episode, depth is hedging for that bad luck. It's hedging on the fact that your star player might get hurt, and you might not need him for a playoff series, because then you're going to lose that series no matter what. But like, we could have stole a game with a normal center in the first game, is my point. Like, we could have stole a game. I don't know. Maybe the answer is that you just focus on developing Bassey and Reed, and you hope that those two are the ones that can keep Joel healthy, and they can make it so that you're not dying every time that he isn't playing. But
yeah, I tend to argue in favor of go for the top end talent and, let depth take care of itself, but not neglect it so much that you're devoting roster spots to DeAndre, who you already knew, should have known wasn't going to be helpful. Like, there were guys that a lot of smart people put out there, like, could Tice have been had? Could they have gotten a guy like Malik Monk or something at one point? So
yeah, there were guys out there. There were depth pieces that they could have figured out a way to kind of figure this stuff out without the Harden stuff. Like,
the Bucks might have overpaid for PJ Tucker, but it also might have helped them win a ring. And they might have overpaid for Bobby Portis, but he did too. And Grayson Allen was certainly a good signing. So
yeah, that, like, he's got to cook on the margins again. We need Harden to be Houston Harden for sure, but we need Morey to be Houston Morey. We need him to find a Daniel House. We need him to find a Trevor Ariza, like, or even PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon types. Like, we need you to start cooking, dude, because otherwise we're going to run our two star players into the ground, and it's going to give us zero chance in the playoffs because they're both going to be compromised.
Yeah, he talks a lot about getting the 1 seed and the 55 games and how that gives you the best title odds. But I wonder if it's worth throwing some of those odds out the window when you have a player like Kawhi Leonard or Joel Embiid, who's, maybe has a chronic situation. I know it's not quite the same for Joel. He doesn't have a chronic thing, but there's a risk there that's similar in magnitude as Kawhi's knee quad issue. So
I'm going to get into this later when I discuss off-season stuff. I'm not getting into off-season mode yet, as Miles Johnson says in the comments, but I just want to see more thought going into preserving our best player and the best player for the Sixers from the past 15 years. Like he's worth protecting, basically, is my whole point here. And we need to, not have as many situations like we were in the first 2 games of this series, which kind of totally took us out of it. And then, just kind of made it so that there was no margin for error, so that they can't split the games with Embiid and win the series. Like they now have to win 2 more games. They need to go 4-1 in the Embiid games in order to win this series. And that just seems like an insane task for anyone when you're going up against a decent playoff team like Miami. So
yeah, that's fair.
All right, bud. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Hopefully next time we talk, we're in better moods and we can get into the nitty gritty of the Sixers and what it will take to win a championship with this fucking team.
All right.
Peace, bud.
Later.